The morning broke like shattered pottery across the desert floor. Ash, Reed's gray roan gelding, stopped without warning in the middle of a dry trail worn smooth by decades of wind and feet. The horse lowered his head, nostrils flaring, and pawed 3 deliberate strikes against the base of a mesquite thicket. Reed swung down from the saddle, boots landing soft on sand still cool from the night. He pushed aside brittle branches and saw her. A woman lay on her side, wrapped in a torn blanket the color of rust and clay. Her left shoulder sat higher than it should, swollen beneath the fabric. Her lower leg was bound with strips of cloth stained dark with dirt and old blood. But her eyes were open, black as obsidian, alert as a blade. "Don't pull me upright," she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady, each word deliberate. "Left knee is dislocated. Shoulder's been wrenched. If you have to touch me, tell me first." Reed nodded once. "I'm Reed. This is Ash. May I check your pulse and breathing?" She gave a short nod. He placed 2 fingers against the side of her neck. The pulse was fast, but regular. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, even rhythm. He unrolled his horse blanket from behind the saddle, folded it twice to make a soft cushion, and slid it beneath her head without twisting her spine. Ash stepped closer, his broad flank blocking the wind that had begun to pick up from the east. "My name is Kaya," she said, eyes shifting toward the ridge above them. "2 men are tracking me. I'm carrying a water ledger, proof they've been stealing from the creek. Don't draw your gun unless you mean it. Get me out of here. Do it right." Reed looked at Ash. Ash turned his head toward a second trail, one less marked by boot prints, more shaded by juniper and stone. Reed asked, listened, and moved. "I'll make a travois with the saddle rigging. Do I have your consent?" Kaya nodded again, and the corner of her mouth pulled into a tired, wry smile. "If we live through this morning," she said, "I'll show you how Ash just saved 3 lives in a spring." The early wind shifted direction. 3 beings, 1 man, 1 woman, 1 horse began a journey that would alter all their paths on the red sand. Reed worked fast, but never rushed. He lifted the saddle from Ash's back and set it on a flat rock. From the saddlebag, he pulled 2 collapsible tent poles, each as long as his forearm. He lashed them in an X-frame with leather cord, then stretched his oilskin duster across the frame to form a sling. He tested the knots twice. Ash stood still, ears forward, watching every movement. "I'm going to slide this under you," Reed said, kneeling beside Kaya. "I'll lift from your hips and shoulders. Tell me if anything shifts wrong." She nodded. He slipped 1 hand beneath her pelvis, the other supporting her upper back, and eased her onto the travois in one smooth motion. Her breath hitched once, but she did not cry out. He secured her with a blanket tucked around her torso, leaving her arms free. He attached the poles to Ash's saddle harness using reinforced D-rings meant for packing gear. Ash took 1 step forward. The travois slid smoothly over the dirt. Reed adjusted the angle so the weight distributed evenly. Ash glanced back, as if checking his work, then started walking at a measured pace, slower than his usual gait. Kaya spoke quietly, her eyes scanning the ridgeline. "There's a cut through the rocks half a mile northwest. Fewer sightlines. They'll expect us to take the main trail." Reed looked where she pointed. The path was barely visible, little more than a seam in the stone. He nodded. "Lead with your hand if you need me to stop or turn." She raised her right hand, fingers open. Reed touched Ash's neck, and the horse angled left without hesitation. They moved in near silence. The only sounds were the scrape of the travois, the creak of leather, and the soft rhythm of Ash's hooves on packed earth. Kaya kept her breathing steady, her gaze sharp. Twice, she raised her hand, palm flat. Reed stopped. Ash stopped. They waited. The second time, Kaya pointed with 2 fingers toward a cluster of barrel cactus. Reed saw it then, a line of disturbed ground, too straight to be animal tracks. Boot prints, half covered by blown sand. He touched Ash's shoulder and guided him farther right, deeper into the juniper shadows. The path narrowed. Branches scraped the travois frame. Reed checked the knots again. They held. Kaya's hand stayed low and relaxed now, but her eyes never stopped moving. Then Ash's ears pinned back. Reed froze. A shadow shifted on the ridge above them, 300 yards out. A man on horseback, hat pulled low, scanning the valley. Reed did not reach for his rifle. Instead, he stepped beside Ash's head and placed one hand over the horse's muzzle, a gentle pressure. Ash understood. No sound. The man on the ridge turned his horse and rode south along the spine of rock. Reed waited a full minute after the rider disappeared before he let his hand drop. Kaya exhaled slowly. "That's Maddox," she said. "He works for the water merchants. If he finds us before we reach dry, well, this ledger disappears and so do I." Reed met her eyes. "Then we don't let him find us." He looked down at the ground. Ash's hooves had left clear, deep prints in the sandy soil, paired and even, leading steadily toward the shadowed corridor between two low mesas. He checked the sun's angle. They had 3 hours of good light left. Kaya's hand rose again, this time with 3 fingers extended. Reed leaned closer. "3 rules," she said. "First, tell me before you touch me. Second, don't twist my neck or spine. Third, water in small amounts, but often." Reed repeated them back to her. She nodded. "You're learning fast." He pulled a canteen from his belt and unscrewed the cap slowly so it would not hiss. He poured a small amount into a tin cup, no more than 2 swallows. Kaya drank, paused, then drank again. He capped the canteen and hung it from the saddle within easy reach. Ash turned his head toward them, then forward again, patient and alert. Reed had seen men in the field treat wounds as if the injured were cargo. He had seen them cut clothing without asking, move limbs without warning, speak over the person as if they were already gone. He would not do that. Every hand he placed, every shift he made, began with a question. Every question waited for an answer. Kaya watched him as he checked the straps on the travois frame. "You've done this before," she said. It was not quite a question. Reed shook his head. "Not exactly like this. But I've carried people who couldn't walk, and I've learned that listening works better than assuming." She studied his face for a moment, then looked at Ash. "Your horse knows it too." Reed almost smiled. "Ash figured that out long before I did." They passed through a stand of juniper where the shade dropped the temperature by 10 degrees. Kaya's breathing stayed steady, but Reed noticed her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the blanket. He stopped Ash and knelt beside her. "Pain or cold?" he asked. "Cold," she said. "My core's losing heat." He pulled a second blanket from his pack. This one wool, heavier. He unfolded it and draped it over her, tucking the edges without pressing down on her shoulder or knee. "Better?" She nodded. "Better." He stood and scanned the area. There was a cluster of flat stones nearby, each about the size of his palm. He gathered 4 of them and set them in a shallow fire pit he dug with the heel of his boot. He struck a match and lit a small bundle of dried mesquite twigs. The fire caught quickly, flames low and smokeless. He let the stones heat for 5 minutes, then wrapped each one in a piece of cloth torn from an old shirt. He placed 2 near Kaya's hips, 1 near her ribs, and kept the 4th in reserve. "This'll hold warmth for an hour," he said. "Tell me when they cool." Ash stood beside them, his body angled to block the wind that came down from the northwest. The horse had not been trained to do this. He simply knew. Reed had seen it before, the way Ash positioned himself between danger and the vulnerable. It was instinct, maybe, or something deeper. Reed had stopped trying to name it. Kaya's voice pulled him back. "The ledger," she said. "It's sewn into the lining of my blanket. Left side, near the hem." Reed found the seam, felt the stiff edge of folded paper beneath the fabric. He did not pull it out. "I'll leave it there until we're somewhere safe." Kaya nodded. "Good. If Maddox sees it, he'll kill both of us and call it self-defense." Reed stood and checked the sun again. They were behind schedule, but pushing faster would risk injuring Kaya further. He looked at Ash. The horse's breathing was calm, his stance balanced. Reed made the choice. "We'll take the long route. Steadier ground, less chance of a fall." Kaya's eyes followed his. "You're choosing time over speed." Reed met her gaze. "I'm choosing you over time." They started moving again. The travois glided over a stretch of hardpan, smooth as river stone. Ash adjusted his pace to match the terrain, faster on the flat, slower on the incline. Reed walked beside him, one hand resting lightly on the horse's shoulder. Kaya's hand stayed visible, fingers loose, ready to signal. The path curved around a stand of prickly pear, and Reed saw a thin line of wire stretched across the trail at shin height, nearly invisible in the dappled shade. He stopped Ash with a soft sound, 2 clicks of his tongue. The horse froze mid-step. Reed knelt and examined the wire. It was new, the ends anchored to stakes driven deep into the ground. A tripwire. He traced it with his eyes and saw the second line 6 feet farther ahead. This was not a casual trap. Someone had planned this. He looked back at Kaya. Can you lean forward without moving your leg? She gritted her teeth and shifted her weight, lifting her torso just enough to see over the edge of the travois. Snare, she said. Maddox uses them near water sources. He'll have a man watching from high ground. Reed scanned the ridges. Nothing moved, but that meant little. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the wire close to the stake, then did the same with the second line. He left the stakes in place. Let Maddox wonder. Ash stepped over the cut wires without prompting, his hooves placing carefully, deliberately. Reed rewrapped the knife and kept walking. Kaya's hand rose briefly, a small wave of acknowledgement. Your horse sees traps, she said. Reed nodded. He sees a lot of things I miss. The trail opened into a wider corridor between 2 low bluffs. Reed could see the far end now, a notch in the rock where the path descended toward the creek valley. They were close. Another hour, maybe less. But the sky had changed. Dark clouds were building in the west, their edges sharp and flat. Flash flood weather. He checked Kaya's position on the travois, then tightened the straps across her chest and hips. She watched him, her expression unreadable. Storm coming, she said. It was not a question. Reed nodded. We need to cross Mesquite Pass before it hits. If the water rises, we're stuck. Kaya's jaw tightened. Then we move. Reed touched Ash's neck, and the horse picked up his pace. Not quite a trot, but faster than before. The travois bounced slightly over uneven ground. Reed adjusted his grip on the lead rope, keeping tension light, letting Ash choose his footing. They had worked together long enough that Reed trusted the horse's judgment more than his own in moments like this. The first drops of rain hit as they entered the pass. The walls rose steep on both sides, layered sandstone carved by centuries of runoff. Reed could hear water already, a low rumble echoing from somewhere upstream. He scanned the path ahead, looking for high ground. There a ledge about 10 feet above the main channel, wide enough for Ash and the travois. He turned Ash toward the slope. The horse hesitated, nostrils flaring at the scent of wet stone. Reed spoke low, steady, easy, 1 step. Ash planted his front hooves on the incline and pulled. The travois scraped against rock. Reed shifted the angle, lifting the rear poles to reduce drag. Ash climbed, muscles bunching beneath his coat, breath coming hard but controlled. They reached the ledge just as the first surge of water roared through the pass below. Reed set the travois down and checked Kaya immediately. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow and fast. Still with me? He asked. She nodded, but her hand trembled when she raised it. Shock, or pain, or both. Reed pulled the wool blanket higher and placed the last heated stone, now only warm, against her ribs. Stay still. We're safe here. The water rose quickly, muddy and thick with debris. Branches tumbled past, rolling in the current. Reed watched the level, calculating. It would crest in 10 minutes, maybe 15, then recede. They had time. He looked at Ash. The horse stood square, head low, rain streaming off his mane. Reed ran a hand down Ash's neck, checking for cuts or strain. Nothing. The horse was built for this. Kaya's voice cut through the sound of rain. If we're stuck here overnight, Maddox will circle around and find us at first light. Reed turned back to her. Then we don't stay overnight. He pointed across the pass, where the water was already starting to drop. 20 minutes, maybe 30, and we can cross on that gravel bar. Kaya followed his gaze, then looked at him. You're sure? Reed met her eyes. I'm sure Ash won't step into water he can't handle. And I'm sure we're better off moving than waiting. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started. The clouds broke apart, and shafts of sunlight slanted through the gap in the bluffs. Steam rose from the rocks. Reed watched the water recede, inch by inch, until the gravel bar emerged, wet but solid. He led Ash down from the ledge, testing each step before committing weight. The travois scraped and bumped, but the frame held. Kaya kept her hand steady, signaling only once when a jolt sent pain through her shoulder. They crossed the gravel bar in silence, water swirling around Ash's hooves but never rising above his knees. On the far side, Reed stopped and looked back. The pass was already draining, the flood reduced to a trickle between stones. He gathered 3 flat rocks and stacked them in a cairn at the edge of the path, a marker for anyone who might follow. Kaya saw it and understood. "You're leaving a trail," Reed nodded. "For the people we trust." The sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Reed could see the town now, a scatter of buildings a mile ahead. Dry well. It was not much a general store, a saloon, a doctor's office, a sheriff's station, but it was shelter. And it was neutral ground, or as neutral as any place could be in territory where water rights and old grudges ran deeper than wells. Ash walked steady, his gait smooth despite the long day. Reed checked Kaya one more time. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing was even. Resting, not unconscious. He did not disturb her. They covered the last mile in silence. The only sound, the creak of leather, and the soft thud of hooves on hard earth. Dr. Lark met them at the edge of town. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight braid and hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon. She took one look at Kaya and gestured toward the clinic. "Bring her inside." Gently, Reed and Ash maneuvered the travois through the door and into a room that smelled of soap and carbolic acid. Lark washed her hands at a basin, then knelt beside Kaya. "I'm Dr. Lark. I'm going to examine you. I'll explain everything before I touch you. Do you understand?" Kaya opened her eyes and nodded. Lark worked methodically. She cut away the makeshift bandages on Kaya's leg, cleaned the wound with saline, and inspected the knee. "Dislocated, but no fracture," she said. "I'll need to reduce it. It's going to hurt, but it'll hurt less than leaving it out of place. Do you consent?" Kaya's jaw tightened. "Do it." Lark placed her hands in position, counted to 3, and pulled. The joint snapped back into alignment. Kaya gasped, then exhaled long and slow. Lark wrapped the knee in fresh bandages and splinted it with wooden slats. "No weight on this for 2 weeks. Minimum." The shoulder took longer. Lark palpated the joint carefully, then looked at Kaya. "Anterior dislocation. I'm going to rotate your arm and guide the head of the humerus back into the socket. It'll be quick, but intense. Ready?" Kaya nodded. Lark moved with practiced speed, one hand stabilizing the shoulder blade, the other rotating the arm in a smooth arc. The joint seated with a dull pop. Kaya's breath hissed through her teeth, but she did not cry out. Lark fashioned a sling from a triangle of cloth and secured Kaya's arm against her chest. "Keep it immobilized for 3 days, then gentle range of motion. No lifting for a month." Lark administered a tetanus shot, checked Kaya's pulse and pupils, and covered her with a clean blanket. "You'll stay here tonight. I'll monitor you for shock and infection." She looked at Reed. "You did good work out there. She's alive because you moved her right." Reed shook his head. "Ash found her. I just listened." Sheriff Boone arrived an hour later. He was a broad man with a weathered face and a badge pinned to a vest that had seen better decades. He stood in the doorway of the clinic and looked at Kaya, then at Reed. "I heard you brought in someone. Want to tell me what happened?" Reed told the story in plain language, no embellishment. Boone listened without interrupting. When Reed mentioned the water ledger, Boone's expression shifted. "That's a serious claim. If it's true, there are people in this town who won't want it made public." Kaya spoke from the bed, her voice stronger now. "It's sewn into my blanket. Left side, near the hem." Boone retrieved the ledger carefully and unfolded it on a table near the window. The pages were filled with small, precise handwriting dates, times, water levels, witness marks. Boone read for several minutes, then looked up. "This says the creek's been diverted. Pipes installed upstream. Measurements don't match rainfall." He closed the ledger and set it down. "If this is accurate, someone's stealing water and selling it back to folks who already own rights to it." A woman stepped into the room. She was tall, with silver hair and a shawl embroidered with geometric patterns. She introduced herself as Clara Finch, owner of the general store. I've seen pipes being laid at night, she said. Thought it was for irrigation. But the direction was wrong. They were running toward the merchants holding tanks, not the fields. Boone nodded slowly. If we're going to prove this, we need more than a ledger and a witness. We need a public hearing. Out in the open, where everyone can see the evidence. He looked at Kaya. You willing to testify? Kaya met his eyes. I am. But if you call a hearing, Maddox and his employers will do everything they can to stop it. Boone's jaw tightened. Then we'll make sure they can't. That night, Reed stayed in the clinic, sleeping in a chair beside the door. Ash was stable behind the building, fed and watered, his coat brushed clean. The town settled into uneasy quiet. Somewhere in the dark, Maddox was planning his next move. Reed knew it, Kaya knew it, and Boone knew it. The question was not if trouble would come, but when. The answer came 36 hours later. Boone received word that a bounty had been posted $500 for Kaya's capture, dead or alive. The paperwork was signed by a man named Garvey, one of the water merchants who controlled the holding tanks and the distribution network. The clock was ticking now. 48 hours to gather evidence, hold a hearing, and get the truth on record before Maddox could act. Kaya sat up in bed, her shoulders still bound but her eyes sharp. I need to decide, she said. Stay and fight this, or leave while I still can. Reed sat across from her, his hands resting on his knees. I can't make that choice for you, but I can tell you that people here are ready to listen. And Boone's serious about making this public. Kaya looked at the window, where the morning light slanted through in pale gold bars. If I leave, the ledger disappears with me, and nothing changes. She looked back at Reed. I'll stay, but if this goes wrong, you get Ash out of here. He's earned better than getting shot over a creek. Reed stood and walked to the door. Ash was outside, tethered to a post near the water trough. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, then focused on something farther down the street. Reed followed his gaze. A man on horseback, watching from the shadow of the saloon. Reed recognized the silhouette. Maddox. Reed returned to the clinic and told Boone. The sheriff nodded. He won't try anything in town. Too many witnesses. But once you leave the buildings, you're exposed. He looked at Kaya. I'm setting the hearing for tomorrow at noon. We'll hold it in the square, so everyone can see. Until then, you stay here. I'll post a deputy outside. Kaya nodded. And the ledger? Boone patted his vest pocket. With me, I've already made copies. If something happens to the original, we've still got the record. That afternoon, Clara Finch returned with a piece of evidence, a valve cap she had found near the creek, stamped with the merchant company's insignia. It matched the fittings Kaya had described in her ledger. Boone examined it under lamplight and made a note in his own record book. This is good, he said. Physical evidence. Harder to dismiss. He placed the cap in a cloth bag and sealed it with wax. Reed spent the evening preparing. He checked Ash's hooves, replaced a worn strap on the saddle, and cleaned his rifle. He did not expect to use it, but he would not be caught unprepared. Kaya watched him from the clinic window. You're planning for the worst, she said. Reed glanced up. I'm planning to get through tomorrow. Whatever that takes. The night passed slowly. Reed dozed in the chair, waking every hour to the sound of footsteps or voices outside. Twice he rose and checked the street. The second time, he saw movement near the stable, a figure crouched low, cutting through the shadows. Reed grabbed his rifle and stepped into the doorway. The figure froze, then raised both hands. It was a boy, no more than 12, holding a bucket. Just feeding the horses, mister, the boy said, voice shaking. Reed lowered the rifle. Do it quick, then get inside. The boy nodded and hurried toward the stable. Dawn broke clear and cold. Boone arrived at the clinic with 2 deputies and a wagon. We're moving you to the square, he told Kaya. The hearing starts in 2 hours. I want you there early, where I can see you. Reed helped Kaya into the wagon, supporting her weight as she stepped up with her good leg. Ash followed behind, his reins loose in Reed's hand. The horse walked close to the wagon, as if standing guard. The square filled quickly. Townspeople came on foot, on horseback, in wagons. They stood in clusters, talking in low voices. Reed recognized faces Clara, Dr. Lark, Elder Nolan from the Apache community to the east, Others were strangers, men in dusty coats and hats pulled low. Reed kept his eyes moving, scanning for Maddox. Boone set up a table in the center of the square and placed the ledger on top, weighted down with a rock. He called the hearing to order at noon exactly, his voice carrying across the crowd. We're here to examine evidence regarding water theft from the creek. This is a public proceeding. Anyone who has testimony or evidence may speak. Anyone who disrupts this hearing will be removed. He called Kaya first. She stood with the help of a crutch Dr. Lark had fashioned, her shoulders still bound. She spoke clearly, describing the measurements she had taken over 6 months, flow rates, rainfall records, dates when the creek ran dry despite recent storms. She explained how the diversion worked, where the pipes were hidden, and who profited. The crowd listened in silence. Elder Nolan spoke next. He described the traditional water-sharing agreements that had governed the creek for generations, agreements that predated the town itself. The water does not belong to one person, he said. It belongs to the land, and to all who live here. Clara testified about the valve cap and the nighttime construction. Dr. Lark confirmed that several families had come to her with illnesses linked to contaminated water from unregulated sources. Boone presented the ledger and the valve cap, passing them through the crowd so everyone could see. He read aloud from the merchant company's records, which showed profits increasing at the same time the creek's flow had decreased. The numbers did not lie. Then Boone called for anyone with opposing testimony to step forward. A man in a tailored suit stood Garvey, the water merchant. He claimed the pipes were for irrigation, the profits were from legitimate sales, and Kaya's ledger was fabricated. But when Boone asked him to explain the valve cap and the timing of the construction, Garvey faltered. He could not account for the discrepancies. Boone let the silence stretch, then spoke. Based on the evidence presented here today, I am ordering the immediate removal of all unauthorized diversion pipes. The merchant company will pay restitution to affected families, and I am referring this matter to the territorial court for further investigation. He brought a gavel down on the table, once, hard. The sound echoed across the square. The crowd erupted in voices, some shouting approval, others arguing. Reed saw Maddox at the edge of the crowd, his hand resting on his belt near his gun. Reed moved closer to Ash, one hand on the horse's shoulder. Ash's ears pinned back. The horse saw it too. Boone's deputies moved through the crowd, calming the loudest voices. Garvey stormed off toward the saloon, followed by 2 men Reed did not recognize. Maddox lingered, his eyes fixed on Kaya. Then he turned and walked toward the stable. Reed followed at a distance, rifle slung over his shoulder but ready. Maddox mounted his horse and rode out of town at a walk, not looking back. Reed watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then returned to the square. Kaya was sitting on the edge of the wagon, her face pale but composed. "It's done," she said. Reed nodded. "For now." That night, Boone posted guards at the creek and the merchants holding tanks. Teams began dismantling the diversion pipes at dawn. The work took 3 days. By the end of the week, the creek was flowing at full volume again, clear and cold. Families who had been rationing water could draw freely once more. Kaya stayed in dry well through her recovery. Dr. Lark monitored her knee and shoulder, adjusting the splint as the swelling went down. Reed stayed too, helping with the pipe removal and setting up a system of marked stakes along the creek to track water levels. Ash grazed in a pasture behind the stable, content and calm. One afternoon, Reed and Kaya sat on a bench outside the clinic, watching the sun drop toward the horizon. Kaya flexed her fingers, testing the range of motion in her shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said. "This town could use a water steward. Someone who keeps the ledger, trains others to read the markers, teaches people how to share the resource without fighting over it." She looked at Reed. "I'm thinking I might stay. For a season at least. See if it works." Reed nodded. "That's a good thought." He paused, then added, "What happens after the season?" Kaya smiled, small and tired. "Then I decide again. Same as anyone." Reed considered that. Fair enough. Months passed. Dry well settled into a new rhythm. The water ledger became public record, updated weekly and posted outside the sheriff's office. Clara Finch organized a committee to manage distribution during dry spells. Elder Nolan taught a class on traditional water conservation techniques. Dr. Lark built a ramp to the clinic entrance, so people with injuries or disabilities could enter without assistance. Kaya trained 3 others to read the creek markers and take measurements. She held weekly meetings in the square, answering questions and resolving disputes before they escalated. The town began to call the gathering place Ash's Stand, named after the horse who had found Kaya and set everything in motion. Reed did not object. Neither did Ash. Maddox was tried in territorial court and sentenced to 3 years for assault and conspiracy to commit fraud. Garvey's company was fined and stripped of its water distribution license. The holding tanks were converted to community storage, managed by a board elected from the town and the surrounding settlements. Disputes still arose, but they were settled through the ledger and the committee, not through violence or theft. Reed and Kaya rode out to the creek one morning, a year after that first dawn when Ash had stopped on the trail. They dismounted and stood at the water's edge. The creek ran clear, its surface reflecting the sky. Kaya knelt and dipped her hand in the current, then let the water run through her fingers. "It's holding steady," she said. "No signs of diversion. Flow rate matches the seasonal average." Ash walked to the creek and lowered his head to drink. When he finished, he pawed the ground 3 times, just as he had done that first day. Reed and Kaya looked at each other and smiled. The horse lifted his head, water dripping from his muzzle, and gazed across the valley. Reed reached out and scratched behind Ash's ear. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew all along." Kaya stood and brushed the dust from her knees. Her shoulder had healed well, her knee strong again. She could ride, walk long distances, and carry her share of the work. She had chosen to stay through the winter, then through the spring. Now summer was here, and she had not spoken of leaving. Reed did not ask. The choice was hers to make, day by day. They mounted and rode back toward town, Ash moving with the easy grace of a horse who had found his place. Behind them, hoofprints marked the soft mud at the creek's edge paired and even, leading away from the water. Around the prints, the surface rippled and smoothed, the current carrying on its endless work. The water ran clear, the ledger stayed open, the land held its balance. And 3 lives, braided together by chance and choice, moved forward into the long light of afternoon.